Good morning. Good morning, good morning, and welcome to Calvary Episcopal Church, whether you're joining us in this room or via the magic of technology. My name is Catherine Bush. I'm the Associate Rector here for Formation. I have been here for just about 2 months, although some ways peripherally connected to this good place. My path just kind of has been zigzagging through Calvary for a long time, and it's good to be here in this role now, and it's good to be with y'all this morning. Let's take a moment as we gather, again, whether you're watching through a screen or coming into the room. Take a moment. If you're not actually actively driving a car right now, put your feet on the floor. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself a moment to be a little grounded in the place where you find yourself, with the people with whom you find yourself. Family, boxes and screens, casual acquaintances in a room, known well or not known well. Take another breath as we gather. This morning, we're going to have a conversation about a poet named Tracy K Smith. There are packets on your tables if you're live with us, and my understanding, because of the good work of other folk, is that there is a packet available to you online. I think that's true. Others are nodding at me. Yes, thumbs up are happening. And information about how to find that, again, through the good work of others. We're going to look at hopefully 4 or 5 poems if we have time. Tracy K Smith was Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019 for the United States, and she is currently on staff at Princeton. She has written a number of collections. 2 of her more popular ones. One is called Life on Mars. It looks like this. And Life on Mars is the one that she won the Pulitzer Prize for a number of years ago. An interesting background story about her. Her father was a Tuskegee Airman and then went on to have a job at NASA as an engineer. This is highly unusual for an African-American family in the generation in which he was a part of. He worked on the Hubble telescope. There are some wonderful interviews with her reflecting on that piece of their family, that connection to science for her. He has now died. She has some beautiful writing in Life on Mars, and also just spoken in these interviews where she talks about that knowing that the Hubble telescope is still out there, really for her is a way of knowing that her father is still out there, and that when the pictures come back, that it's like her father is still communicating. And there's some really lovely elegiac poetry about her relationship with her dad in Life on Mars. We're not going to read those today. We're going to be reading some poems from this collection called Wade in the Water. And I have no idea what inspired her to write these poems, what led her to collect them in this way. As I have been pulling them together and been putting together this day's reflection, it seems to me that she must have been thinking about Advent. She must have been thinking about John the Baptist. She must have been thinking about the story of the Annunciation. There's just no way around it. If this ever makes it out into the multiverse through the magic of technology, and she, in some weird twist of fate, comes across it and says, that is not what I intended at all, and she hunts me down, I'll deserve it, because I don't know what she was thinking. So I'm taking great liberties today. I, as the reader, have decided that several of these poems, to me, speak about the themes of Advent. You, as the listener, can trust me and believe me, can argue with me during class or after, can draw your own conclusions, and she can do the same, frankly. But I have the microphone right now, so we're going to get started, and y'all tell me what you think. The first poem that we're going to look at is a poem called Beatific. before I read it for us, I want you to put yourself in a car. You may be the driver of the car, you may be sitting in the passenger seat, you may be sitting in the back seat, and put yourself on your least favorite street in Memphis. Pick that one, you don't need to name it out loud, Poplar Avenue. Put yourself at a busy intersection. Make sure that in your mind's imagination you are late for wherever you're trying to go. And now I want you to imagine one of our neighbors sauntering across the intersection. Okay? So you're feeling all the feelings, you're driving the car, or you're trapped because your mom is driving the car, you're late for the thing that you are trying to get to, the traffic, and the person who is making his way across the intersection. So you've got that in your mind. Okay, so now with that image, beatific. I watch him bob across the intersection, squat legs, bowed in black sweatpants. I watch him smile at nobody, at our traffic, stopped to accommodate his slow going. His arms churn the air, his comic jog carries him nowhere. But it is as if he hears a voice in our idling engines calling him live, swift, Prince of creation. Every least leaf shivers in the sun while we sit bothered, late, captive to this thing commanding, wait for this man, wait for him. So we talk a lot about waiting in the season of Advent. Waiting is not the same thing as being patient, right? These are two different qualities. These are two different states of being. And we enter into them differently. A lot of people have reflected on the character of John the Baptist as having this kind of, this nature of being this strange man. He's often, we often comment on what he's wearing, this camel's hair, what he's eating, locusts and wild honey, this kind of crazed, maybe slightly not well-medicated persona that he might have. That he kind of bursts onto the scene, yelling at people, prophesying in a way. And there is some, in a completely non-diagnostic way, there's some sense of where we look at these people on the fringes of our society that we don't have time for. We aren't ready for, we don't want to hear from. They're a nuisance to us. And yet they have something to tell us. And here he comes. He can hear something that we can't hear. He hears a voice in our idling engines that tells him who he is. He is lithe. He is swift. He is the Prince of creation. And we must stop. We must slow down. We must wait for even for him. Something must stop us in our tracks from our errands, from our busyness, from all of the things that we must do. I've added to this poem, kind of in conversation, Naomi Shihab Nye is another poet. This poem I got from the collection from the book, but this poem appeared in the New York Times magazine sometime back, and they do this thing where poets suggest other poems that you should read, and Naomi Shihab Nye offered this poem, and this is what her comment about it was. She said this: attention to the stranger crossing any road in any town or city, patience with the awkward encounter, the unknown intention, respect for the other whom you do not know, but with the slightest stretch of mind you imagine you do. Tracy K Smith's unforgettable poem from Wade in the Water feels so potent right now. The pedestrian sees himself one way. hears his own music and those engines idling for him. But who among us doesn't see ourselves one way? Take it easy. I am thunderstruck by the human care of these last lines. By the care, the human care of remembering this person has a story. Whether I ever hear it or I don't hear it, whether it's a story that speaks to me, that calls to me, or not, this person has a story. We were talking before class started about whether or not we'd be able to stop and pause because there is an online community that I want to honor, but there's also a community gathered. I wonder if there is a line or a reflection that you just want to lift out before we moved on to the next poem, or a response to this first poem, Beatific. The every least leaf shivers in the sun. Yeah. And I appreciate that too, because the poem is not a quote unquote nature poem, but it reminds us of the beauty, right? That's there too. Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks. Anyone else? Let's look at hill country. I'm going to kind of keep us moving along in hopes that we can cover several of these. And then if there's time for more conversation, either at tables or as a larger group, we'll do that. Hill country. He comes down from the hills, from the craggy rock, the shrubs, the scrawny live oaks and dried up junipers, down from the cloud bellies and the bellies of hawks, from the caracaras stalking carcasses, from the clear, sun-smacked soundlessness that shrouds him, from the weathered bed of planks outside the cabin where he goes to be alone with his questions. God comes down along the road with his windows unrolled, so the twigs and hanging vines can slap and scrape against him in his Jeep, down past the buck caught in the hog trap that kicks and heaves, bloodied, blinded by the whiff of its own death, which God, thank God, staves off. He downshifts, crosses the shallow trickle of river that only just last May scoured the side of the canyon to rock, gets out, walks along the limestone bank, castor beans, cactus, scat of last night's coyotes, down below the hilltops. He squints out at shadow, tree backing tree, dark depth the eyes glide across, not bothering to decipher what it hides. A pair of dragonflies mate in flight. Tiny flowers throw frantic color at his feet. If he tries, if he holds his mind in place and wills it, he can almost believe in something larger than himself rearranging the air. He squints at the Jeep glaring in bright sun, stares a while at patterns the tall branches cast onto the underside of leaves. Then God climbs back into the cab, returning to everywhere. So in hill country, when I read this poem, several of the things that I appreciate, one is just the rich imagery of the place. So I have never been to the Holy Land. This is one of my great goals in life, is someday to get there. Seems like just about everybody I know has been, and they all tell me I need to, so yes, I'm already convinced. You don't need to tell me that I should go. But when I read the stories and when I hear about John the Baptist gathering people at the river and coming out of the wilderness and all of that, what I have in my mind is like southern deciduous forest, right? Which I know is not what it looked like. One thing that I really appreciate is her description of the landscape. Whether this is, again, she's probably not writing about John the Baptist. That's me. I get to layer things on because I'm the reader, and I'm the one with the microphone. But the richness of her description and the bellies of the hawks and the caracaras and just the lines and the I can see it, even though I haven't been to this place. I also really appreciate that we start off this poem with this just kind of generic, he comes down from the hills, the craggy rock. And then it's midway that she kind of shifts to, oh, wait a minute, it's God. God comes down, and now it's incarnation. And now it's suddenly, oh, wait a minute, what if we were to think about like God coming into the world in this way? And I am like so excited about baby Jesus appearing in the manger. I can't wait. But also a Jeep? I mean, that's awesome. That's like a whole reinvention and a whole like reopening the story of like, what if when God showed up in a Jeep with the windows rolled down? Y'all, it literally opens all the windows to the story. And then there's humor in here too about, so it's not humorous that the buck is trapped, but that, which God, thank God, staves off. Like God, she's playing with this language of who's telling the story and what's happening. And for me, the poignancy of the last line, then God climbs back into the cab, returning to everywhere. Not returning and leaving, not returning away, but returning and still everywhere. And the gift of that is lovely to me. Reactions or responses, I know this is hitting a lot of you. Maybe you're familiar with Tracy K Smith. Maybe you've read all of these. But if it's newer to you, what strikes you? A line, an image, an idea. Yeah. Say that one more. The dragonflies mating. You know what? That's how they do it. That's how they do it. Yep. Okay.
I'm not speaking to any specific line in this, but it reminded me, Tim and I, in the middle of November, went to Herman, Missouri for a wine festival. And it's in Ozarks, and it's lush and beautiful water and everything. It was just gorgeous the 3 days that we were able to spend there. And then all I could think about was driving back to Memphis on that highway. And my God, what a deer runs in front of us.
Oh, right. The highways and the driving and the anxiety of that, right, exactly, yeah, right. And there is both strangeness and familiarity to this, and I appreciate her, in her writing, I often find that in a way that reading scripture to me can often, it's familiar because I've been reading it for 46 years, but it can feel strange because it's so otherworldly in its time frame and its other side of the globeness. And this feels both strange and familiar because it's in my time, but she's recasting stories and all of that. Anyone else? A response to Hill Country? Yeah.
As you led off with your introduction, she had me going John the Baptist numbers.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it seems very John the Baptist to me, but again, that's because I went in looking for John the Baptist, so I found him. Right, yeah, so, yeah. She's yeah. And again, she probably didn't intend any of it, but I think that there is definitely, she's got God here, so that's not us layering, right? So God comes down the road with the windows rolled down, and then I think too this, toward the end, tiny flowers throw frantic color at his feet. If he tries, if he holds his mind in place and wills it, he can believe in something larger than himself, rearranging the air, and that kind of like, one of the hardest parts of the Trinity for me is the Spirit, and that, or just the idea of the Trinity too, but that kind of like, what is rearranging itself to make sense, right beyond my grasp. And that there's the shadows that he doesn't quite have to decipher that. He doesn't have to bother with that. He can just let the shadows be the shadows. So there's just so much beautiful language in here that is lovely to me.
Along with that, look when he gets, I love that he gets out of the jeep and he walks along the limestone bank, castor beans, cactus, scat of last time's fire.
Yeah.
So it's all there.
It's all there. Right, exactly. The good and the bad, the pretty and the reality of there's nothing that's outside of that vision, of that story. Yeah, absolutely. So today's gospel reading, if you've been to church already or if you're headed there next, is the story of John the Baptist coming to offer baptism. And we're going to read the title poem next from the collection called Wade in the Water. And you'll see the line set off for the Geechee Gullah Ring Shouters. And this is this community off the coast of South Carolina, kind of almost where it meets Georgia. And this, what she goes there to witness, and you get the sense of it as the poem unfolds, is a community of African Americans who are direct descendants from those who are still retelling the story of coming over through the Middle Passage, of their enslavement, and then of being freed from slavery. So all of those themes are going to unfold in this relatively brief poem, given what it is, but then the language of baptism and the wade in the water. And if you kind of have in your maybe humming in the back of your mind, the spiritual God's going to trouble the water, okay? Wade in the water for the Geechee Gullah Ring Shouters. One of the women greeted me. "I love you," she said. She didn't know me, but I believed her. And a terrible new ache rolled over in my chest, like a room where the drapes have been swept back. I love you, as she continued down the hall past other strangers, each feeling pierced suddenly by pillars of heavy light. I love you throughout the performance, in every hand clap, every stomp. I love you in the rusted iron chains someone was made to drag until love let them be unclasped and left empty in the center of the ring. I love you in the water where they pretended to wade, singing that old blood-deep song that dragged us to those banks and cast us in. I love you, the angles of it scraping at each throat, shouldering past the swirling dust motes in those beams of light, that whatever we now knew we could let ourselves feel, knew to climb. O woods, O dogs, O tree, O gun, O girl, run, O miraculous many gone, O Lord, O Lord, O Lord, is this love the trouble you promised? That one needs a moment, doesn't it? For me, in this poem, the weight and the angularity of love is really significant. That love is offered so freely, as it said at the very, very beginning. One of the women greeted me, "I love you," she said. She didn't know me, right? This is a woman who's walking up and down the halls. "I love you, I love you." She is just says this is what she says instead of, "Hey, how are you?" Right? She doesn't say, "Hey, how are you?" She says, "I love you, I love you." So there's a lightness and an ease to that, but then everything that comes with that is a terrible new ache, being pierced, heavy light, a stomp, chains, Right? I mean, there's everything. Every time there's an "I love you," there is a heft and a weightiness to that. And I really appreciate the sense of both the free gift of that love, but that doesn't make it cheap. That doesn't make it, even though it's freely offered, that doesn't make it easy. Or something that you can just be like, hey, thanks. But that if you were to really receive it, like, oh, windows are opening, the curtains are pulled back, oh, things are different now. And better, like, I have been gifted with something, but but things are different now. And I will be changed by this. Okay?
In reading this, I was thinking of the people in Mayfield, Kentucky.
Mm.
A small community, 10,000 people. They probably all knew each other fairly well. And it was, when you see them, it's somebody expressing, I love you, hey, how do you do?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they find themselves totally obliterated. And I was asking myself yesterday, where did they find God in all of this? Did he bring this trouble on them? No, he didn't. But then you heard the news this morning how people from all over are coming in to help.
Right.
And that's the real love.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
just a hi there, it's a we're here to help you.
Right. What does it mean to be a neighbor to someone? It can be casual most of the time, but then it means showing up. Yeah. Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
It spoke to me of
Forgiveness
forgiveness
that we don't
deserve.
we don't deserve forgiveness. Yeah.
Most of us were old enough to have lived through this.
Would you mind just? Thank you.
Those of us that have lived and grown up in arch segregation,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always just floored by the forgiveness that's there by people my age or younger. And Miss Pat, please don't call me Miss Pat. This ain't no plantation. but just the forgiveness that's there that I feel like we never deserve. Though I've spent the last half century now trying to make up for it. But we forget that even the ones who succeeded so well, they went through all that stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
They saw their parents go through it. They
Right.
made it. And that's the thing that struck me along
Right.
with that. And then I also think about folks that we don't really like these days. But when things happen, like Mayfield, everybody shows up.
Right.
Everybody shows up.
Yeah.
Like the Cajun Navy, they just show up no
Right.
matter where or when.
Right.
But that's what struck me.
Right, and I think that reflecting on that forgiveness piece for me too is again that thing that seems like it can be offered like, oh, and now everything will be better, but really it's again kind of a weighty gift to really receive. The same way that this sense of that an ache rolls over a room where the drapes have been swept. Well, now I really see. So yes, to be forgiven is a gift. And it requires, so again, we're going to hear about what it means to repent, to turn your life around. Like I can't just say, oh, I'm forgiven, and now I get to keep doing, right? But there's change required and all of that. So I appreciate your comment. Thanks. Yeah.
I wonder if you might unpack the last line. Is this love the trouble and promise?
Do you want to make a stab at it, Jill, before I?
Well, it makes me think of, who was it you died recently from good trouble? The name escapes me just now.
John Lewis.
Yes, John Lewis is good trouble. But I just don't know, is it referencing a scripture?
So for me, so for those who are online, the question is about the last line. Is this love the trouble you promised? And there's references to John Lewis and good trouble. For me, it's the spiritual of God's going to trouble the water. And others may have other connections and allusions and things like that. But that again, this kind of like, yes, you were promised love, but that doesn't mean ease. And the challenge of living in a life where, if we're going to follow Christ, that that's gonna be hard sometimes. That's where I go with my own reflection. What she intended, the layers are again her own. She's responding to this kind of performative reenactment of the retelling of the story of folks who, again, from the Middle Passage to slavery to freedom seeking to today. And again, it is biblically centered in this kind of baptismal, water-based, so.
There was a show on Nickelodeon that used to come on in the morning. I used to let my kids watch called Gullah Gullah Island.
Uh-huh.
And it was the early 90s, and it was just a little show about the people who were proud of their culture, and it was
Right.
colorful, and it was more of a it wasn't a plotted kind of show. It was more of
Right.
hang out with us while we make Christmas ornaments and a Gullah tradition kind of show.
Right.
And I just wonder if she doesn't just set this poem just anywhere. It's for the
Right.
Geechee Gullah range
Mm-hmm.
members.
Right.
And I just wonder if we aren't invited also to participate in the cultural shift. Like, how weird would it be if we just at the beginning of the poem, I just imagined how awkward I would feel if Heidi, like, if I walked into Heidi and Heidi said, "Oh, I love you, Jill," I'd be like, okay, right.
She does. She does love you. Should we just a little more filtered in our, yeah.
But it does
Yeah.
kind of invite layers of intimacy.
Yeah.
And then that last line feels like a smack to me, like, oh yeah, I promised to bring thee not peace but a sword. So
Yes, and I think it's very much playing with that it's an angular, hard thing that we are offered, not like cozy comfort. So, speaking of Heidi, she's approaching the microphone, which I bet is to offer a thought from someone online, or maybe your own thought. You might.
Yeah, it's actually mine.
Oh, good, great.
I was thinking about the water and how it's a character in here, almost like the land was in the
in
last
Hill
one,
Country.
and I really appreciate that. And so water, in a religious context, like you've mentioned, we kind of start with baptism or with cleansing or with newness. But here the water drags down, it's part of death. And so I was appreciating that the way that it's troubled or complicated. And then just sitting here and looking at the end, thinking about escape again of, it seems that they're, running from slavery, and then the water could deliver them from the scent that the dogs would follow, and that they could be free again. I think it's such a rich reading of how water is all of these things. It's life, it's death, it's escape, and so just liked it.
Thank you. Well, and even in baptism, we don't often dwell on this, but baptism is a death to sin. I mean, we sprinkle, but in a lot of places they immerse you to mimic a drowning, right? To mimic like you go under and come back, right? So it is a much more fulsome understanding of you die to your previous life and are reborn. Okay, I want to make sure that we have to, yes. Oh, it's a great hymn, yeah. Yep, thank you. Right, that it's a rough story. When I mean, like,
the risk that we take, as little as we can say to someone, I love you.
yeah, thanks. All right, let's look at the angels. Next page. And if you'll imagine again with me that we're moving through the Advent season, this is going to get you ready for next Sunday. Kind of. Again, I'm in charge of the themes way. The angels. 2 slung themselves across chairs once in a motel room, grizzled in leather biker gear, emissaries for something I needed to see. I was worn down by an awful panic, a wrenching in the gut, contortions. They sat there at the table while I slept. I could sense them with a deck of playing cards between them. To think of how they smelled, what comes to mind is rum and gasoline. And when they spoke, though I dared not look, I glimpsed how one's teeth were ground down almost to nubs, which makes me hope some might be straight-up young thugs, young, slim, raw, who bounce and roll with fearsome grace, whose very voices cause faint souls to quake. Quake then, fools, and fall away. What God do you imagine we obey? Think of the toil we must cost them, one scaled perfectly to eternity, and still they come, telling us through the ages not to fear. Just those 2 that once, and never again for me since, though there are they, sightings, flashes, hints. A proud tree in vivid sun, branches swaying in a strong wind, rain hurling itself at the roof. I picked this before the other night. Boulders, mounds of earth mistaken for dead does, lions in crouch, a rust-stained pipe where a house once stood, which I take each time I pass it for an owl. Bright whirl, so dangerous and near, my mother sat whispering with it at the end of her life, while all the rooms of our house filled up with night. Okay, so a few things about angels. Every time angels show up in Scripture, the first thing that they say is, don't be scared. If you are the kind of being that the first thing you have to say when you enter a room is, don't be scared, my guess is that you don't look like a Renaissance painting of a baby with a fat bottom. So, because those are cute, and they don't need to say, don't be scared. So, angels are probably a little more intimidating and a little kind of more something that, if that's the first thing you have to say. So her imagining the angels as these grizzled leather biker-wearing emissaries who smell like rum and gasoline with their teeth worn down kind of works for me. And again, this kind of, so the other thing that's true, it's not just angels who say, don't be scared. That is actually the most oft-repeated phrase in all of Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, is do not be afraid, or don't be scared, or be of good courage, or variations on that thing. You have to kind of hold that, widely to get that. That's the most often repeated. Which is also interesting to think about, that this is the thing that is, from Genesis to Revelation, the most consistent message to us is, don't be afraid. Which, as a person who lives with some fear in her life and some anxiety and all the things, that is actually tremendously comforting to me. That I'm clearly not the only person who's scared sometimes and who's worried and anxious. And it's not just 2021, y'all. People have been worried and scared for a long time. And God has sent messengers, and some of them are grizzled bikers, and some of them are Gabriel, and some of them maybe were cute little babies with, cushy tushies and things like that. And some of them were our neighbors who said, are you okay? Don't be afraid, right? The power's out, but I've got you. You can charge your phone at my house. Because one of the scariest things that can happen is that we couldn't charge our phones. So again, this okay, so let's talk about fear. And let's talk about the comfort provided from, what it means to be encouraged, that we are regularly, our fear is acknowledged, our fear is seen, and that we're not meant to live like that. That's not how God wants us to go through the world. So if we're thinking again, next Sunday we have Mary, and we have a little glimpse of some Annunciation. What I love too about this angelic visitation is that we don't know what they told her, what they came to say. They showed up for emissaries for something actually that she needed to see. She was worn down by an awful panic. But what happens next is that she slept. She could rest. And they stayed and played cards. And the comfort of knowing that someone's in the room with you, the peace of that, the peacefulness of knowing, okay, I can rest, you're there. Whatever the message was, whatever she needed to see or hear, I'm curious, but I don't really need to know, because it was something so lovely that she could rest. The other piece that I'll offer you, and then if you have reactions to it, again, there's a New York Times connection, and I've given you the excerpt. They do this thing from time to time where they call it a new sentence, like a sentence that's never been written before. And the new sentence is from near the end: a rust-stained pipe where a house once stood, which I take each time I pass it for an owl. And that phenomenon that we all have where we walk past something and we know what it is, but we see it kind of wrong. Or we see it, maybe not wrong, maybe better. I'd rather see an owl than a rust-stained pipe. And he gives you some other examples of a voice that sounds like something else, or an image that we hear differently. But just the playfulness of that, and the invitation to kind of think, what do I walk past in my own home? Or what do I drive past every day? And I think that's what that sign says, but actually it says something else. So it's a gift as well. Your reactions and thoughts to the angels, or to the idea of Annunciation.
Sounds like she's finally having peace with her mother's death.
Right, yeah, so we do end there. So she has said this is it for her, that this hotel room, except she's aware that maybe not, right? So we end with, there's a bright whirl so dangerous and near. My mother sat whispering with it at the end of her life, while all the rooms of our house filled up with night. That maybe even if she couldn't grasp it, she knew her mother had something. It's another kind of peace that we have on behalf of others.
Frequently when I'm on the streets, especially downtown, and see a stranger coming towards me, I know that I'm supposed to look at them and see Christ in that person. But I sometimes avert my eyes, and this reminds me, do not be afraid.
Yeah, thanks.
But I'm really going to try to work on that.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks. And in that way, I think it echoes back to that first poem of who is this person walking along the intersection? Who are these people showing up? And again, we're supposed to see Christ in everyone, but it is hard to do that. And whatever it takes to remind us to walk into the world a little more open-eyed and open-hearted, it's good. It's good. Thanks. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I would just mention that the people that you're seeing on the street and you don't know who they are,
Thank you. That's a very practical tip. Thank you. Yeah, and a gracious way of responding. Yeah.
And they get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I wish I could.
Thanks.
I wish I could. I wish I could give it to you and we could buy more drugs and alcohol.
Thanks.
They get it. And I think this whole thing is a bad dream.
As what?
I think what she started here with, I think she must have had a bad dream.
A bad dream to you? Okay.
But my first thought was, what's she doing in a motel room with two vipers? So I think it was a dream that she had that took her there, and then the peace that you don't have to be afraid of everybody.
Okay. I think, do we have time to do the last one? Somebody in charge can tell me? Okay. Let's look at an old story before we close. An old story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind. Livid, the land, and ravaged, like a rageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals long believed gone crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. Often for me, when I hear that the prophets are coming, I get scared. Like I said, I live with a lot of anxiety. And I'm like, oh no, they're coming, it's gonna be awful, they're gonna, it's gonna be terrible. I've been made to understand that it will be terrible. And they are coming to shake their fists and point at me and tell me all the things that I have done wrong yesterday, today, and I will do again tomorrow. And I neglect to look for and see the hope in what they are offering. Because it is true that I've done a lot wrong, and we collectively have, and I'm sorry to be the one to remind you of that, but yes, it's true. And also, they wouldn't show up if there weren't the possibility of something more. And again, that God wouldn't send the angels to say, I didn't mean for you to live with this much fear, I meant for something more for you. And that there is color, and we are singing again, actually, literally. So yay for that. And that there is this sense of we think that things are that's just going to be rage and epic fighting from here on out, and it seems like that. This poem taps into me a little bit into that. If any of you are Narnia people, C.S. Lewis, and when at the end of, toward the end of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the White Witch thinks that she has won because she thinks that she is successful. So some spoilers, sorry. She thinks that she has killed Aslan, but there is a deeper magic. She knows magic, but there's a deeper magic. And I'm aware that there are young people here, and I'm really worried that I'm about to ruin Christmas. So sorry, parents. But so she says, where's the line? Something large and old awoke. That there's a deeper magic, an older story, like something even more that she doesn't know. And that's some of what we do here as we try to kind of tap into this, there's this surface shallow story of rage. And then there's something more that's deeper and more beautiful and that's more hopeful and more merciful and more beautiful and more everything that it could be. And that when we are reminded of that, something large and old awakes, that all is not lost. Our singing brings on a different manner of weather. Animals long believed gone crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. The forgiveness and love that we were speaking of earlier. We wept to be reminded of such color. May it be so. I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm happy to chat in little groups now or in the days to come. And I appreciate your showing up to talk a little bit about poetry and Advent. There's more next week. Scott's going to talk about Wendell Berry, and that'll be great. So see you next time, same channel, and see you in church if you haven't already been. Thanks, y'all.